My sister laughed and said, maybe dying will finally make you interesting, so I cancelled her credit cards, killed the power, and watched as the bank took back everything. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who plots revenge. But when someone laughs at you while you're at your lowest, when they mock the thing that could ruin your life, it does something to you. My name's Darren. I was 29 when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The symptoms had crept in slowly, numbness, fatigue, brain fog, but I brushed them off for months. When I finally saw a neurologist and got the diagnosis, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. The first person I told, stupidly, was my girlfriend of 2 years, Tessa. We'd been living together for almost a year. I honestly thought she'd cry with me. Support me. Be my anchor. Instead, she laughed. I'll never forget her face. She blinked at me, dead silent for a second, and then said, MS. Wait, you mean that brain disease thing? Are you going to end up in a wheelchair or just forget my name first? Then she cackled. Full-on laughed. Like it was a punchline. I didn't say a word. I just walked out of the room. I couldn't even feel my legs. I think it was shock, not the MS. Over the next week, she pretended it never happened. She kissed me on the cheek in the morning, made coffee like usual, and even asked if we could go to Tulum in the summer, before you get all, sick and stuff. I realized then, she wasn't just insensitive. She was selfish to her core. She saw me not as a partner, but as a burden on her image. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I smiled, nodded, played along. I needed time. Because I wasn't going to just leave. I was going to ruin the future she built off my back. And she had no idea what was coming. Tessa and I met during grad school. She was getting her degree in marketing, and I was deep into software engineering. At the time, I was freelancing, pulling in solid money, and by the time we moved in together, I'd landed a remote job with a tech firm that paid better than I ever expected. She wasn't doing bad either, at least, that's what she made it seem like. But slowly, I noticed the truth. She wasn't contributing much. Rent, groceries, utilities, nearly all of it was on me. She'd pick up the occasional dinner, but the bulk of the load? Mine. And I didn't mind. Back then, I thought we were building a future together. She used my income to quit her entry-level job and start her own social media management company. I built her website, set up the email marketing system, even optimized her SEO. Within 6 months, her client list exploded, and not one of those clients knew she never touched a line of code or back-end analytics. That was all me. Every win she posted about on LinkedIn. My work. I'd poured hours into her business, never asking for credit. I believed in her. But when she laughed at my diagnosis, at my pain, it flipped a switch in me. Suddenly, everything I'd done for her felt like a mistake. A debt that needed to be repaid. I started collecting everything. Passwords. Server access. Client info. Contracts I had ghostwritten for her. Every digital skeleton she'd forgotten was buried in the back end. Because if she thought mocking me was funny, she was going to love what came next. The first domino I tipped was subtle. I logged into the back end of her site, something she hadn't touched in months. I made a few harmless updates. Changed some image links to break. Redirected 1 or 2 pages to outdated content. Nothing major, just enough to spark client frustration. Then I waited. 2 days later, I heard her pacing the kitchen, yelling into her AirPods. Something about a contract renewal gone wrong and a client threatening to walk. I acted confused. Weird, I said. I thought you handled that account personally. She rolled her eyes. They're just being dramatic. Right. That same night, I logged in again. This time, I exported the entire client list and every email exchange I could find. Then I took it a step further, I accessed the analytics dashboard I'd built for her and scheduled it for deletion in 48 hours. She wouldn't even notice until it was too late. Meanwhile, I reached out to her two biggest clients, companies I had on board. I wrote from a professional email I created just for this, explaining that I was no longer affiliated with Tessa Media, and that, unfortunately, their data was no longer secure due to mismanagement. I didn't slander her. I didn't have to. I just told the truth. And it worked. By the end of the week, I overheard her sobbing through a phone call, trying to salvage her contracts. She was saying things like, "I don't know what happened," and, "Please, we can fix this." She couldn't. Because I was just getting started, around that time, I made sure to distance myself even more, mentally, emotionally, financially. I opened a new bank account. Had my paycheck rerouted. Quietly canceled the joint credit card she abused for business expenses. She noticed eventually, of course. Why was the card declined? She asked one morning, standing in front of me with a $6 oat milk latte she clearly hadn't paid for. "No idea," I said, barely looking up from my laptop. "You might want to check with the bank." I could see the panic start to set in behind her eyes. Then came the final blow. Tessa had been pitching herself as a guest speaker for an upcoming business seminar in Miami. It was a big deal, she'd been hyping it up for weeks. Bragging about the exposure, the networking, the panel she was supposed to moderate. What she didn't know was that I had full access to the entire pitch deck she submitted, including the sample case studies. Ones I had created for her. I sent an anonymous email to the event organizers with proof that her submitted materials were plagiarized, mostly lifted from competitors' content, reworded just enough to avoid suspicion. I even linked the originals. 3 days later, her invitation was revoked. Publicly. She spiraled. She blamed the organizer. She blamed jealous competitors. But deep down, she knew something was off. She just didn't know who was pulling the strings. By the end of that month, her business was collapsing. Her reputation. Toast. And me? I was packing up my things, calmly, quietly. I left her a note on the counter, "Mock the diagnosis if you want. But don't forget who built your future, because I just took it back." I walked out without looking back. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No echoes of her voice. No forced laughter. No fake sympathy. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Tessa, meanwhile, tried to reach me. She texted. Called. Emailed. At first it was cold fury, accusations, demands, threats. Then came the desperation. "Can we talk? I miss you." I didn't mean to laugh, I was just scared. Scared of what, exactly? That I wouldn't be the same man she could keep milking for free labor and status? I didn't respond. One day, she even showed up at my new place. She must have found the address through a mutual friend or an old document I'd forgotten to change. I didn't open the door. Just watched her from the peephole as she knocked, then slumped against the wall, crying. That part almost got to me. Almost. But then I remembered how she laughed when I told her I had MS. Like I was defective. Like my illness made me disposable. I knew then, this wasn't guilt. This was regret, because I was no longer useful. Her company folded 2 months later. Without me managing the infrastructure, her workflow collapsed. Clients left. The word got around that she couldn't deliver without that guy she used to live with. I never corrected anyone. I never took credit. I didn't need to. Because she built her entire brand on a lie. And I simply stopped protecting it. That I spent the next few months rebuilding my life slowly, quietly. I took some time off work to focus on my health, physical therapy, nutrition, actually listening to my body instead of trying to outwork it. And for once, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. Just me. The neurologist told me I'd caught it early. That made a huge difference. I wasn't doomed, as Tessa once joked. It wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't the end of my life. In fact, I started to realize, it might have been the beginning of a better one. I joined a support group online. Talked to people who got it. People who didn't treat me like I was broken or something to pity. Through that, I met Lara. She was a UX designer who also had MS, diagnosed a year before me. We hit it off almost instantly, not because of our diagnoses, but because of how we faced them. She was sharp, funny, and didn't flinch when I told her about what I'd been through with Tessa. In fact, she laughed, not at me, but at Tessa. Girl built a castle out of your brain and had the nerve to laugh when the foundation cracked. She said. Please. It felt good to laugh again. Real laughter. Not cruel, not forced. Just light. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like the villain in my own story. I was just a guy who got burned, and chose not to stay in the fire. Months passed, and I stopped checking her socials. Not out of bitterness, just disinterest. Tessa's online persona had always been a fiction, and once I'd stopped feeding it, there was nothing left to see. But then one day, I got a message from an old mutual friend. Just a simple link, no text. It was a Reddit post. From Tessa. She didn't use her real name, of course, but I recognized the writing instantly. She was asking for advice, spinning a tale about how her ex sabotaged her business after a messy breakup. She painted herself as the victim, claimed I was jealous, controlling, mentally unstable. And the kicker? She tried to use my diagnosis as part of her argument. He was spiraling after the MS diagnosis, she wrote. I tried to help him, but he turned on me. I should have been furious. But I wasn't. Because the comments destroyed her. People saw through it immediately. They picked apart the contradictions, questioned her timeline, and most importantly, called her out for weaponizing someone's medical condition. You laughed at him after he was diagnosed. And you're the victim. Yikes. No wonder he left. It was poetic justice. She'd finally exposed herself. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. She was unraveling on her own, and this time, the internet was holding the mirror. After that Reddit post, she disappeared from every platform. Instagram. Deleted. LinkedIn. Scrubbed. Her website. Gone. It was like she vanished. Part of me thought she might reach out again, try to twist things into some final manipulative plea. But she didn't. And I realized, Tessa wasn't the kind of person who apologized. She was the kind who rewrote reality to avoid ever admitting fault. But this time, no one bought it. I, on the other hand, was finally breathing again. Lara and I started seeing more of each other, virtually at first, then in person. We talked about everything, illness, career, betrayal, love. But it never felt heavy. It felt real. No performance. No pretending. One night, we were walking through a quiet park. I was telling her about a new freelance client, someone who actually respected my time, when she stopped and looked at me. You ever think maybe she did you a favor? I blinked. Who? Tessa, she said. You found out who she was before you married her. Before kids. Before you wasted another decade thinking she'd have your back. I'd never thought of it that way. Maybe the diagnosis didn't ruin my life. Maybe it saved it. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected email. It was from a startup I'd applied to before my diagnosis. A senior dev position with flexible hours and full remote support. Back then, I withdrew my application. I didn't think I could handle the pressure. But now, I was stronger. More aware of my limits, yes, but also more confident in what I could offer. The CTO wrote, saw your old application. We'd still love to talk if you're available. I took the interview. And crushed it. By the end of the call, they offered me the job with a salary that made my old one look like pocket change. More importantly, they valued the lived experience I brought to the table, including my health journey. They didn't see it as a weakness. They saw it as resilience. That same night, I treated myself and Lara to dinner at this tiny rooftop place she loved. It wasn't about the money, it was about celebrating progress. Real, earned, quiet progress. While we sat under string lights and talked about nothing and everything, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. Lara glanced at me. Spam. I shrugged. Probably just the past. Trying to crawl back in. She smiled. Let it die there. And I did that. I didn't hear from Tessa again. Not directly, anyway. But I did get one final update, completely by accident. Lara was scrolling through a design forum and stumbled on a thread titled, "When your brand implodes and your ex builds a better version without you." It was a long post from some anonymous account, but it was clearly about me. It talked about a guy who used to work in the background, and how he'd gone on to create something 10 times more functional than the original. The details were twisted, of course. I was painted as this mysterious, bitter coder who stole ideas and betrayed the woman he loved. But the tone? It wasn't angry. It was resentful. Wounded. And it was obvious who wrote it. Tessa had watched from afar as I rebuilt, not out of spite, not to flex, but because I could. And that stung more than anything I'd done intentionally. Because the truth was, I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won. She laughed at my diagnosis like it was the end of my story. She had no idea it was just the beginning. Sometimes I still think about that moment, her laughter. How sharp and casual it was. Like I'd just told a bad joke instead of revealing the scariest thing that had ever happened to me. But it doesn't haunt me anymore. It reminds me of how far I've come. Because for a while, I thought my diagnosis was going to define me. I thought it would shrink my world, ruin my chances, turn me into someone people pitied. Instead, it revealed the truth about the people around me. It exposed Tessa for what she was, someone who only knew how to love when things were easy. And it introduced me to people like Lara, who didn't flinch when life got hard, who leaned in instead of stepping away. I no longer live in reaction to pain. I build forward now. The new startup? It's going great. I've got a team who respects boundaries, deadlines, and health. I even launched a side project, a non-profit tool to help people with chronic conditions track symptoms and communicate better with their doctors. It's already picking up traction. Tessa. She became a cautionary tale. A whisper in professional circles. That girl who lost everything because she didn't know who was holding her up. I don't need closure. I have peace. A year later, I stood at the edge of a coastal cliff in Portugal with Lara beside me, wind in our faces, the ocean stretching wide and endless. We had taken the trip on a whim, something I never would have allowed myself before. Too risky. Too expensive. Too, what if something goes wrong? But now, I'd stopped living in fear of the what-ifs. We watched the sun dip into the water, and I felt this strange, grounding sense of gratitude. Not for the pain. Not for the betrayal. But for what it forced me to confront. For the walls it tore down and the ones I rebuilt stronger, brick by brick, around people who actually deserved to be inside. Tessa had once told me, no one wants to be tied to someone who might fall apart. But falling apart wasn't the end. It was just the renovation before the Betrayal foundation set in. She laughed at my diagnosis like it was a punchline. But I wrote the ending. And it was never her story to tell,